Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is David and today we are going to discuss flow state. What is it? How do we achieve it? And how can we harness its power in educational and personal settings? Let's get into it. Have you ever been so absorbed in something that hours flew by without you even realizing it? Maybe it's binge watching a series, but let's aim for something a little bit more productive. You see, flow state is achieved when we are completely immersed in an activity that challenges us just enough. Not too easy, not too hard. You know, like Goldilocks, but instead of porridge, we're talking about your focus and skills. Flow is that magical mental zone where time disappears, distractions fade, and all that matters is the task at hand. It's when your skills meet the perfect challenge and everything clicks. Flow doesn't just benefit individuals, it can have a huge impact on societal well-being. When people are in flow, they become more creative, productive, and fulfilled. Imagine a world where everyone is deeply absorbed in their work, loving what they're doing, and getting stuff done, not just because they have to, but because they want to. Now, while this may sound like a utopia where by definition everyone's goals are the same, it's not. This state of engagement can transform workplaces and communities into hubs of innovation and happiness. And flow state can lead to more sustainable lifestyles too. Research shows that flow is more likely to occur during activities like sports, creative arts, and socializing, all of which have low environmental impact. So whether you're sculpting clay or playing soccer, you're not just entering a state of bliss, you're also saving the planet. Talk about a win-win. And this intersection of environmentalism with flow state was very interesting to me, so I'd like to take a look at this infographic with you here. So on the left-hand side, we have environmental impact score, and this is based off of the CO2 emissions that each activity emits. And then on the bottom, we have mean flow state score. So all of these different activities are plotted along this graph to show how valuable these activities will be in achieving this flow state score, at the same time determining how much carbon dioxide is produced by each activity. Now, this is a really interesting graphic for me, at least, to have a look at, because a lot of these were surprises to me. So if we look at the top left-hand corner, we see yoga. Now, yoga is very high in carbon dioxide emissions, and I couldn't really figure out why, because if you think of the way that yoga is normally done, you don't need much material. There's not a lot of infrastructure that a person would need to participate in yoga, but once you start to think about maybe the yoga mat, maybe the clothing, there's so much other gear that can be associated with this idea of yoga, and then forget about the studio and maybe you're doing hot yoga, and a lot of these different nuances when it comes to something like yoga can really stack up. And I was surprised as well to see that the flow state score was very low with yoga as well. Let's look at another one, almost right in the middle of this infographic, where we have dancing and/or performing a performance art. That sounds funny to me, to have performance art as a singular. I will do one performance art. Anyway, and then on the farthest right possible, the activity that produces the highest score on the flow state scale is arts and crafts. There is a lot of research that has gone into the papers like the one that this infographic is from, and I find it very interesting that a lot of the focus is on environmental factors when it comes to engaging in activities in our daily lives for fun and/or to achieve flow state. It really proves to me that there is something to be said for the environmental impact contributing to this idea of flow state, because the connections that we have with our environment are very important. And this does seem closely tied into Indigenous ways of knowing, in my perspective, because a lot of the knowledge that I've been given by Indigenous elders and the research that I've done over the years has a strong connection to what we're discussing here. So that's really interesting to me. Activities such as sports, arts and crafts, physical intimacy, speaking with friends, and contemplative practices are well placed to support the experience of flow in the absence of high environmental costs. Life happens, and sometimes it's not great, but how we respond makes all the difference. Positive psychology provides a framework for understanding how people can bounce back from trauma, not by ignoring the pain, but by focusing on strengths and growth opportunities. Positive psychology encourages us to find meaning and resilience in hardship, whether it's through practicing gratitude, building emotional intelligence, or developing self-compassion. These strengths can turn traumatic experiences into opportunities for growth. This focus on what's right rather than what's wrong empowers people to heal and thrive after trauma. It does make sense, and it is true. Building emotional resiliency and emotional intelligence and filling your toolbox with strategies that you can use to help yourself when you go through hard things in your life is a good skill and does contribute to an overall happier life experience in the world. But I think sometimes the messaging, like what I just read to you there, can serve to make somebody feel shame about themselves. And not even just that, because I think a lot of trauma that a lot of us experience is not our fault. And of course, any traumatic event that you go through is probably not your fault. I mean, I guess there is the potentiality that you would be at fault for your own trauma. I've been in that spot before. So if I think of myself as an individual, I have the ability to develop the skills to help myself through trauma when and if it should happen. But that becomes an incredibly large and most often insurmountable task for somebody who is struggling within a system where it's not just trauma on a personal level. There is trauma from all sides. There's trauma from previous generations, there's trauma within your experience, and you most likely are passing off some of that and maybe some of the same and or maybe some brand new trauma to the generation that comes after you. So it's not just personal responsibility. There does have to be systemic support for people and communities going through traumatic events, because I think it's very, for lack of a better word, gaslighty to say, well, just go to therapy. Why haven't you been able to figure this out? You as an individual have the ability and the power to do it. And while yes, personal responsibility is a huge part of this conversation, it's not everything. If I were to give a personal example about this, and this is definitely a warning for what I'm about to say in regards to gun violence. When I was 21 years old, I traveled to Las Vegas, Nevada to celebrate my birthday, and unfortunately, that was on October 1st, 2017, where one of the largest mass shootings in modern United States history took place. And while I wasn't physically injured in that event, and I was and do remain incredibly grateful that I was not, there was a lot of trauma that I went through just on a psychological level being near the event. And not only that, but being around the people that were closer to the event that I was myself. There was definitely an air around the entire city for the remainder of my time in Las Vegas. So if we think of this trauma on an individual level, I flew home 24 hours later and immediately started my first teaching practicum, which was a challenge in itself. But there was this individual responsibility for myself to go to therapy. Ultimately was the thing that helped me out of that the most. But ultimately that was my responsibility in order to help myself through that traumatic event. But the other piece of this puzzle is gun control. If we have a system that doesn't openly discourage traumatic events like this from happening through policy, it's not fair to expect all of the people in these communities to be able to help themselves through this on a regular basis. I live in Canada where there is gun control, but I do travel to the United States quite regularly, and the amount of violence that I have seen in that country has taken a toll on me individually, so I can't imagine the amount of collective and individual trauma that is placed upon American people from this one issue. That is all to say, individual responsibility definitely does matter, but in the grand scheme of things, where I'm not David, I am just a human being in the blip of the collective consciousness of humankind, individual responsibility I don't think matters. It's the policies and the systems that inherently control us. All right, that was my rant. Let's move on. Now, positive psychology does associate several benefits when it comes to responding to adversity and trauma, and some of which are a decrease in depression and anxiety-related symptoms, increased well-being, and greater life satisfaction. These things can be achieved in part by fostering attitudes in ourselves and our students through practices like developing a growth mindset and identifying strengths and practicing gratitude and meditation. And again, I don't want to sound like I disagree with any of this because I think that this is all correct. But if I view this perhaps on a continuum, let's say, and on the left-hand side, we'll have the negative numbers, and then on the right-hand side, we'll have the positive numbers. So if being able to positively respond to traumatic events is all the positive numbers on the right-hand side, and not being able to do all of those things is the negative numbers on the left-hand side, I think all of the systems and policy need to be in place to be able to bring an individual to zero. If you are not able to at least reach a point of neutrality, gratitude's not going to help. And that is purely my opinion, but I don't think gratitude's going to help you in such an incredible way if you are not able to be in a spot of neutrality. I think gratitude is very important and powerful, and me personally, I do practice gratitude and it does help me, but it can only take you so far. Identifying your key strengths can only take you so far. It's like missing the forest for the trees, you know? There are bigger pieces to the puzzle before we can go start adding in gratitude. And I think maybe why I'm harping on this idea so much is that I've seen this happen a lot in classroom settings. We have a student in front of us who is not able to engage in any academic material. And God help you if you think that's an act of defiance, because it's not. Ooh, I feel fired up today because other people's behavior has everything to do with them and nothing to do with you. You have to be able to take your ego out of everything you do, but especially as a classroom teacher, there's no place for an ego, and that's where I'm going to leave it. Achieving flow state is something that I have to do very intentionally, and it's not only done through gratitude, it is done through structuring my life in such a way where these systems of oppression that have their thumbs pressed down on many of us aren't able to affect me in the same way. And I do have an incredible amount of privilege to be able to do that as somebody who is white and most often perceived as male. My personal experiences with flow state, and it is definitely something that I have achieved definitely on a regular basis because I am very lucky and happy to be able to be a content creator and make videos like this and spend time on editing. So dance, music, drag, makeup, piano, vocals, all of these things. And I think there's a really delicate balance to be able to find this flow state when you're engaging in these activities, because when I was a full-time classroom teacher, I wasn't necessarily able to engage in a lot of these things and achieve the flow state because I was so busy. But now a challenge that I face is in the effort to monetize all of the things that I really enjoy and the things that I normally achieve flow state in. Because I'm doing these things on such a regular basis, it is harder to achieve flow state, right? If I think about this today right now, it's 7:36 p.m. right now, and I've been filming for 6 hours, 7 hours. I've been filming a long time. But I also believe that currently in this moment, I am in flow state. I do have a script in front of me, but as you can probably imagine, I put it down several minutes ago. But I like to think of this idea of flow state again on another continuum. I'm a continuum kind of girl. Something that I've heard a lot in educational settings and in others too is this idea of attention to detail. And again, if we have attention to detail on one end of the curriculum, this is kind of this idea of social efficiency when it comes to education, of the students come in and do this, and here's the rubric, and there's no room for deviation, and we're doing it this way because that's the only way it's ever been done. So the way that I conceptualize having attention to detail, keyword being attention, that would be, let's say, a -10 on this continuum of flow state. In the middle of this continuum at a 0 would be patience for detail. Because it's one thing to notice the details, but it's another thing to be able to actually slow down and engage with some type of work in order to attend to those details that you're picking up on, right? There's a big difference in there, but I still don't conceptualize that as flow state. If we're taking it then from 0 to 10 being the achievement of flow state, at least for me personally, I think of this as passion for detail. You're able to sit down and you're actually enjoying it. You want to get your hands messy, you notice all the things, and maybe you have a list beside you and you're writing down all the things that you need to do, and you're kind of going in order, and ooh, what if we color coded things? That's where I achieve flow state, is when I have that passion for detail. Because a lot of the times when we hear people ragging on others because they don't have attention to detail, I think they're missing a big part of the equation here. I have attention to detail in every moment. I don't always have the passion for detail though. Sometimes I have the patience for detail. Like when I'm editing this video later, I'm gonna have the patience for detail, but I don't think I'm gonna have passion for detail. But that's how I like to conceptualize my personal idea of the flow state. And there are lots of times that I engage in that. An example I can think of when I have achieved flow state is when I was packing for my summer semester. So I do not live in Lethbridge. So I had to go on a vacation to complete my summer courses there at the U of L. And I had to pack 2 weeks worth of clothing in order to do that. And if you know me at all at this point, you probably know that I enjoy dressing nicely, or I enjoy engaging in fashion. Really puts me in a flow state. It took me 3 hours to paint this face today. Because I had flow state on my mind, because I knew I was filming this video today, I definitely had the passion for detail as I was laying each individual stone and doing all of these different intricate things, like the glittery highlight. I have a passion for that. I'm getting off track. But when I was packing my clothing, that took me probably 4 hours. And I think the average person would probably take 30 minutes and throw a specified amount of things together in a suitcase and just call it a day. But I individually tried on all 14 outfits that I was taking. And this took me hours, but it's because I had the passion for that detail, because it was something that I was interested in doing. So naturally, I think it's definitely easier to achieve flow state in something that you enjoy versus something that you don't enjoy. If I tried to force somebody who doesn't like clothing, or maybe doesn't have clothing that they enjoy wearing, it would be really hard to achieve flow state, because flow state happens when our skills match the challenge we're facing and when we're fully immersed in the task at hand. When both the internal alignment of passion and skill combined with an external environment that allowed for deep focus, this creates the ideal conditions for flow. Now, this is a quote that I wanted to incorporate here, but I had no idea where to put it, so I want to talk about it. Holding strong materialistic values makes an individual less likely to experience flow. This may be partly because more materialistic individuals tend to exhibit low levels of self-regulatory strength and try to avoid being in contact with uncomfortable feelings. I can't say I disagree, and somebody who has definitely had a past of being materialistic, that definitely rings true for me as well. The connection there is really fascinating, but I can't afford any more off-script time, so let's keep going. In education, flow is like the holy grail of learning. It's when students are completely immersed in their work, not because they have to be, but because they are genuinely interested. To foster this state, teachers need to support 3 basic needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So let's break it down by looking at this chart. So on the left-hand side, we have the 3 self-determination needs. So first we have autonomy, which is the need for choice. Second, we have competence, which is the need to feel capable. And lastly, we have relatedness, which is the need for connection. And then on the right-hand side, we have the teaching practices that support each of these 3 self-determination needs. So for autonomy, we have giving students options in how they approach their assignments. And we've talked about this before, of being able to diversify how students hand in their work. I would think of this video in particular. I wouldn't believe that many other people would hand in a video essay in place of perhaps answering a few questions on paper. I'm out here doing the most, but it's because I feel some sense of flow state while engaging in this. My work is better than it would be if it was just simply written, right? Next up, the teaching practices in order to support competence. We can offer constructive feedback in order to build skills, set appropriately challenging tasks that match student abilities. We can offer constructive feedback to build skills and set appropriately challenging tasks that match the student's abilities. Lastly, the practices that can support relatedness are things like facilitating group work and peer mentoring and creating a supportive, inclusive classroom environment. And most of these things sound maybe basic or easy to achieve, but the amount of nuance that is needed for all of these different practices is so great. I could spend a full video on each of these individual things and how you can achieve them. Because I think when it comes to these ideas like fostering an inclusive classroom environment, my mind immediately jumps to a fluorescently lit gymnasium on a Friday with a group of teachers where there's no students and some sorry presenter is up there trying to teach these exhausted teachers how to create a classroom environment. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. That's interesting because that completely loops back to what I was talking about before. A lot of these teachers are exhausted by a system that doesn't appropriately support them with funding, with take your pick really. Creating an environment that is inclusive isn't necessarily at the top of the teacher's list of priorities, which sounds horrendous, but as a classroom teacher, it's not. There are bigger fish to fry. And that's sad. Every time I try and talk about something, it always comes back to the systems of oppression. Hey, I guess that really bothers me. Moving on, because when students feel a sense of control over their learning, have the skills to meet challenges, and feel connected to their peers, flow becomes much more likely. And when students are in flow, learning feels less like a chore and more like an adventure. Future work should aim to determine how best to encourage and support flow experiences to achieve sustainable fulfillment. In the end, flow is more than just a fleeting moment of concentration. It's a key to happiness, well-being, and even environmental sustainability. By fostering flow in our personal lives, our workplaces, and our schools, we not only enhance our productivity and creativity, but we also contribute to a more engaged, fulfilled, and sustainable world. Next time you find yourself completely lost in an activity, whether it's painting, writing, filming, singing, or maybe even working, take a moment to recognize that you have unlocked something extremely powerful. And hey, if it's saving the planet at the same time, that's even better. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.